what God's Spirit is saying to you. For once you were in darkness, but now in the Lord you are the light. Live as children of light, for the fruit of the light is found in all that is good and right and true. Try to find out what is pleasing to the Lord. Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. For it is shameful even to mention what some people do secretly. But everything exposed by the light becomes visible, for everything that becomes visible is light. And therefore it says, "Sleeper, awake, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you." Here ends the reading of the words that give us insight on God. May God grant to us wisdom and courage for interpretation.
Hear the word of the Eternal, you chieftains of Sodom, and give ear to God's instructions, you folk of Gomorrah. What need have I of all your sacrifices, says the Eternal? I am sated with burnt offerings of rams and suets of fatlings and blood of bulls, and I have no delight in lambs and he-goats. That you come to appear before me, who asked that of you? Trample my courts no more, bringing oblations is futile. Incense is offensive to me, new moon and Sabbaths, proclaiming of solemnities, assemblies with iniquity, I cannot abide. Your new moons and fixed seasons fill me with loathing. They are become a burden to me. I cannot endure them. And when you lift up your hands, I will turn my eyes away from you. Though you pray at length, I will not listen. Your hands are stained with crime. Wash yourselves clean. Put your evil doings away from my sight. Cease to do evil, learn to do good, devote yourselves to justice, aid the wronged, uphold the rights of the orphan, and defend the cause of the widow. Come, let us reach an understanding, says the Eternal. Be your sins like crimson, they can turn snow white. Be they red as dyed wool, they can become like fleece. If then you agree and give heed, you will eat the good things of the earth, but if you refuse and disobey, you will be devoured by the sword, for it was the Eternal who spoke.
Rabbi Devorah, welcome.
Thank you.
We are so glad to have you here. Thanks for being a part of us.
Hi, everybody. Thanks.
Friends, it's my honor and privilege to introduce Rabbi Devorah Marcus to you from Temple Emmanuel here in San Diego. We first chatted, I suppose, a little bit when we were putting together our interfaith service after the election. And she wasn't able to make it to that, but she said, if you ever have any interfaith events in the future, I'd like to be a part of it. So it's kind of you to be a part of this interfaith event.
It's very kind of you to invite me.
Yes. Well, Rabbi Devorah, would you start by telling us just a little bit about yourself and how it is that you came to be a rabbi?
Sure. Hi. So I am a native of Southern California. I'm on the other side of the age gap officially because I was one of the first 100 babies born in the new baby wing, in the new maternity wing at Cedars-Sinai Hospital in LA, which they just tore down to make a new baby wing. So I feel like that's largely symbolic somehow. So I was raised in Costa Mesa, so just up the road a little bit. My family, actually on my mom's side though, is from San Diego. My grandparents were a part of the founding members of Temple Emmanuel, and we used to come down once a month to visit relatives who were here. So San Diego has long held a place of love and affection in my heart. So I grew up in Orange County. I did my undergrad at Bradley University in the Midwest. That was a cultural experience in and of itself. I had a wonderful time, learned a lot about myself and others and religion. And then I moved back to California. I worked as a youth advisor at a synagogue for 2 years. Then I had my mid-20s life crisis and went off to Italy to teach music at the American School of Milan for a year, because why not? And then I returned and worked at REI for 2 years. I know more about socks and footwear than any one person ever should. And never wear cotton socks. And then I went to rabbinic school. And our first year at the rabbinic school I attended is Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion. And the first year we all do together in Jerusalem for that first year. And then there are 3 stateside campuses that we get farmed out to. And I was at the Los Angeles campus and grew to love Los Angeles, and then moved to Long Island for 5 years. which was also a great cultural learning experience, and then was blessed to earn the position at Temple Emmanuel in San Diego. So my whole life, though, growing up, every summer I went to a place called Camp Swig, which was a Jewish residential summer camp. Most Jewish parents ship their kids off to Jewish summer camp in the summer. It's good for the kids, it's good for the parents. I think it has a lot to do with Jewish family continuity. And that was really where I developed my love of Judaism. I grew up in a household where Judaism came first and secular life came second. So I had that encouragement and reinforcement from my parents. And then every opportunity that arose in high school where I had an opportunity to travel to Israel or to go on a youth trip or go on a youth weekend, my parents supported my interest in doing that. And I really found that my greatest passions in life, which were working with people, having great conversations, and studying and learning, as well as music and social action and social justice, all were there in the synagogue and in my Jewish life. And no matter where I went, when I was at Bradley University in Peoria, Illinois, when I was living in Italy, when I was working as a youth advisor, always I would find myself as the accidental Jewish community leader and educator about Judaism. And the more I did that, the more I loved it, and so it just felt like a really natural fit to then go enter into the rabbinate. Wow. I felt a strong calling, so so there I went down the rabbit hole.
Yes, and here you are.
And here I am today.
Now, you're a part of a branch of Judaism called Reform Judaism, and Temple Emmanuel is a Reformed Jewish synagogue. Could you tell us a little bit about Reform Judaism and how that's different from other forms of Judaism?
Sure. Well, first, let me just say, I always like to joke that Jesus was a Reformed Jew who was 2,000 years too early. So Reform Judaism, there were two simultaneous evolutions of it. One happened on a thoughtful, academic, conscientious level in Europe. In the 1800s, it was a part of the Enlightenment movement. There was a Jewish Enlightenment movement that was happening at the same time. And what this movement said was that we want to leave the walls of the ghetto. Emancipation was being offered and rescinded in different countries throughout Europe. And there were a lot of Jews who wanted the opportunity to learn to speak the local language, so French in France and Germany and German in Germany, and who were looking forward to the opportunity to get a secular education, join trade unions, participate in the economy, participate in public life. Jews had always been a part of public life in Europe, but from the time of our forced expulsion from our homeland by the Romans in 70 of the Common Era, we had been unwelcomed guests in Europe, really, for 2,000 years. And sometimes we would do okay, we would live in a place for a while and it was great, and then we would get kicked out. So our longest record in Western culture without getting kicked out was 400 years in Spain, and then Ferdinand and Isabel got a little zealous and booted us. So we're coming up on 400 years in America, so we're really excited that we're going to break the record. But there were a lot of people in Europe who were really excited to begin participating in secular life, who wanted to find a way to obviously still be Jewish, but participate in European life. And so the Reform movement said you can do both. They said you can assimilate and participate in secular life, you can wear regular clothes, we can clean up our service so it's orderly, especially in German Judaism. The German Jews became much like the Germans. They wanted order and not chaos in the prayer service. And so it was sort of a natural coevolution with our neighbors in Europe. And that was the conscientious, thoughtful Reform Judaism, and that was really based on, with my joke before about Jesus being a Reformed Jew who's 2,000 years too early, Reform Judaism decided that Jewish law, which is called halakha in Hebrew, should have a voice but not a veto, which means it should help inform our decisions about how to live our modern lives, and we should weigh it heavily in our decision making, but just because halakha says something doesn't mean that it should overrule our ability to make a different choice. So a perfect example of that in our modern world is that, for 2,000 years, Jewish halakha said that two men being in a relationship was forbidden because of the two lines of Leviticus. Well, Reform Judaism says, thank you, halakha, for sharing your opinion. We have decided that opinion is no longer relevant, and we recognize that God made everybody individual and unique, and love is an expression of God. And so whoever you love, the worst problem that we should have in life is too many people who want to get married, make families, and raise children. So we changed the halakha. Yeah. We made some radical innovations too, like women can be leaders, and women are actual human beings with the right to agency and to sign our own contracts. We are not chattel. I always think of Dr. King's expression that the arc of the moral universe is long but bends inexorably towards justice, because sometimes, 5,000 years of Western civilization, and we're still arguing about whether women are human beings. So with rights to their own selves and bodies and minds. But these are the innovations that halakha made. So that's the conscientious, Reform Judaism. We want to still be Jews. We're practicing our Judaism, but we're adjusting halakha to adapt to our modern sensibilities. Then on the other side, there's the non-self-conscious Reform Judaism, which was the Jews who were on the boats coming over to America, who dumped, the joke is they would dumped there to fill in those prayer boxes that you've seen a lot of Orthodox especially wear on their arms and their heads, that they would dump their fill in over the sides of the boat, landing at Ellis Island, and hopped off and said, "My name is Smith." Sure it is. And just people who were not interested in living under the rule of halakha anymore. There was no thoughtfulness about it. There was just a full desire to assimilate, to not be anchored by Jewish identity, and so really a lot of secularism and a lot of barely might dip a toe into a synagogue at the High Holy Days. It's like 2 times a year Jews. Yeah, I understand that might be a problem in the church sometimes too. Christmas
yes,
and Easter.
I've heard that.
Yeah, I've heard. Not here, of course.
Of
not
course
here.
not.
Yeah, never. Yeah. So those were the two. There was sort of the American, woohoo, we're free, we don't have to do anything anymore. And the more European, no, we're still committed to halakha. We just are committed to changing halakha.
That really resonates with me, because this tradition, the movement that led to the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, was also kind of a product of the Enlightenment and folks seeking religious freedom. And in fact, were folks who had come from Europe to the Americas to find religious freedom and to be true to their own intellectual ideas in their own heart and mind. So
nice.
I think there's a lot in common
Absolutely.
between the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, or mainline Protestantism, and Reformed Judaism.
Yeah, definitely.
Could you tell us just a little bit more about Judaism in general, as for folks who maybe aren't all that familiar with what it means to be a Jew, and what it means to be a Jew in the United States right now?
It's a good and a big question that's really complicated to answer. So Judaism is, and I think that this is important for people to know, because I think it's probably one of the biggest misnomers about Judaism. Judaism is not just a religion. If you want to convert in, you have to convert in through the religion. But as Jews, we know ourselves, and our history is that we are a people. We're an ethnic people who have a shared ancestry. We actually have gene markers that differentiate us from other people. So in the same way where someone might be of Asian descent, or someone might be of North African descent, or West African descent, or Central African descent, we are of Jewish descent. We are a distinct people. Who has a culture, a language, a history. You can be an unwavering member of the Jewish community who never steps foot inside the synagogue, and that doesn't mean that you're a bad Jew. It means you're a non-religious Jew. And I have found sometimes with my Christian family, we have Christian family and friends, that's probably the area of biggest confusion. So I always like to tell a story. If this is on YouTube, sorry guys, I won't mention you by name, just talking to my cousins. I have a cousin who was dating and is now married to this fabulous woman who was raised in a different faith tradition, one of the Christian traditions, and when they were getting serious, I said, you've got to have the talk about like what you're going to do with the kids before you get engaged. And so they had a talk about it one night, and my cousin said, Debsy said we should talk about what religion we're going to raise the kids in. And she said, oh yeah, we should. I mean, obviously, I guess. And then at the same time, I guess, I don't know, improvising the conversation, he said Jewish and she said Mormon. And so that was they were surprised by each other's answers, and she responded to him. She's like, "You never go to synagogue," and he was like, "Well, you don't feel your faith," and she was like, "It doesn't matter. At least I go." And so it was like this. It was she struggled with her faith, and he struggled with his attendance, and. In that moment, though, the thing for my cousin was he realized he could, even though he wasn't a good Jew by outward standards of attending synagogue regularly or participating actively in the Jewish community, he was so deeply Jewish, he couldn't, he said, I could no more ask my arm to unattach itself from my body than I could stop being Jewish. And that's, I think, the part that's difficult. It's not just about the religion, it's not necessarily about the tenets of faith. It's really about the tribal affiliation, the cultural affiliation, the familial affiliation, the fact that we're still just a big tribe. And you see that in that, if you were to take your average Orthodox Jew living in Williamsburg, like maybe a Hasidic Jew, they and I would have very little in common about even the way that we practice the holidays and how we understand Jewish law and what we think is the right way to be a Jew in the world. But if someone were to come after them or harm them or threaten them, I feel as much an obligation to them as they do to me. Because in the end, even though we fight with each other enormously, like all good families do, we're still mishpacha, we're still family. And so even in our huge disagreements, we're still inexorably linked together. So the biggest challenges for Judaism today, I would say, are assimilation is always a big challenge. Struggling to keep the community connected when there's no real reason for the community to be connected. My dad asked me once when I was a teenager, and it really made me angry. He said, "Can Judaism survive without anti-Semitism?" And I thought that was the most insulting question I'd ever heard. I said, of course it can. But, we do. We see a spike in attendance after anti-Semitic attacks and after anti-Semitic threats. So there's something about our people. We're a little bit stiff-necked, as you might have read in Exodus. We're a little bit stubborn, and we sometimes don't show up when we should. We show up when we're scared. That's a big challenge. And as far as how Judaism is practiced today, there's Reform Judaism, Conservative Judaism, Orthodox Judaism, and within each of those three main branches, there's a whole bunch of sub-branches, like sub-communities, sub-philosophies. There's also Reconstructionist Judaism and Renewal Judaism. So there's a lot, it's not schisms. You can't think of it as like schisms in the church or different sects, because we all still, I can go to a conservative synagogue and participate. It's not a big deal. Sure. Other than that, we have different tunes and the service is a bit different, but ultimately it's all part of the same thing. Yeah.
What are services like?
So we have a set liturgy that we follow always for every single service. And services will vary from congregation to congregation, depending on the philosophy and mood of the congregation. So the congregation that I grew up in tended to have very, sometimes joyful, but also very solemn services. And at camp, it's a bunch of kids sitting around, Jerry Garcia looks down on us and smiles because everyone's in ratty clothes and arms around each other and everything's on the guitar. If you walk into an Orthodox congregation, the men and women are separated so that there's it's a heteronormative construct so that people aren't sexually attracted to each other during services, because I guess they're worried that people will be bored and will look licentiously across the aisle. It's also nice, though. It creates like a little bit of a nice space where you don't have to worry, you don't have to worry about certain things in that kind of a setting, which is nice. Services vary from group to group. So like in the Orthodox service, there'll be a lot of individual prayer, but everyone's kind of going at their own pace, but then someone at the front will sing a line out loud so that everyone knows where they're supposed to be and can either catch up or slow down. So that's some of the chaotic feeling that the German Jews didn't like. Our services are very orderly, and we announce the pages, and everyone has a prayer book, and everything goes through a set order of prayers that begin with praising God and then acknowledging our relationship, our covenant with God, God's obligations to us, our obligations to God, and then into the Amidah, which is the silent tefillah. It's the silent prayer section. I'm trying to not use Hebrew words. It's the silent standing prayers, in which we believe we're entering into our most intimate personal conversation with God. But the fun thing about that, you can only do that at its highest level when you're with your community. Judaism much emphasizes communal prayer over individual prayer, in part because individual prayer tends to be focused on the self, and it's about you and your needs, and Jewish prayer is not about that. Jewish prayer is asking you to disengage from the self a little bit and only engage with yourself as you connect yourself to your larger communal obligations and to this world, to be reminded about our obligations to care for each other, and to support each other, and to be God's hands, feet, and mouths, acting on behalf of God in this world. There are petitionary prayers too during the week where we ask God for things like good judges, good government, a lot of those are the two I've been focusing on lately. And enough food to feed everyone, and for there to be peace in Jerusalem, and for there to be peace in the world, for wisdom, for healing, for forgiveness, all of these things. So we run through a whole list every day. And it can get, sometimes people feel like, well, if it's the same thing every week, it gets boring. And that's true if you're not engaging with it deeply. But the idea is that the other thing I love about having the fixed prayer, and that eventually most people who practice it come to love, is that it gives, I always like to say the fixed prayer are a jungle gym structure that your mind can crawl on and play on while it goes to other places. So it gives us words to speak when we don't know how to speak. It gives us words to say when nothing that we could say is remotely appropriate or even comes close to expressing our deepest desires and needs. And there's a lot of singing and a lot of Hebrew. Our congregation, it's all singing in all Hebrew, with a few little English prayers thrown in. Yeah.
Wow. What's your favorite thing about your tradition?
Oh, there's a lot. One of the things that I love most about Jewish tradition is, and the reason I chose that Isaiah reading for this morning, it's a little bit harsh, but I love it because what it's saying is don't be a hypocrite, right? Don't go out in the world and talk about what a good religious person you are, and then don't come into the synagogue and talk about what an amazing religious person you are, and donate a lot of money here and sit in the front row and feel very proud of yourself, but then not pay your workers a living wage. And then turn your back on someone who's homeless and hungry, and judge people and condemn people. This is why God says, I see what's on your hands. And when God says, hide your evil away from my sight, it's erroneous, right? Because there is nothing that we could hide away from God's sight. So what that line is saying is don't do it. Stop. And I love that idea that God says, don't walk into my house and act like someone or something that you're not, because you might think that you're fooling everyone, but the one that it matters knows and sees. And so I love that call for integrity, that we have to be inside who we are outside and vice versa, and that what we do on the street is our actual form of prayer. And what we do in here is just the conversation about it. So I love that every day, every moment of every day is a call to justice and community. I love how our community handles deaf, which sounds weird, but after 5,000 years of culture, you get a few things right. Just the nature of how the community is trained to rally around people who've lost a loved one, that we bury people right away to force you to confront the death and force you to begin a mourning practice, that you get 7 days of just being a mess and being non-functional. And then after that, we're like, okay, you have to leave the house, start cleaning it up a little bit, and then you get 21, 22, you have 30 days total for your first 30 days of mourning to kind of be a mess, but start to function in the world, like maybe do a little grocery shopping, but wear ugly sweatpants when you do it. And then after that, we say, all right, now you're into the rest of your first year of mourning. You have to go back out into the world. You have to go to work. You have to go engage with people. You have to go back for Torah study. You have to go to services. You have to go do these things, but in the first year, you're not supposed to go to any, we call them smachot, or a simcha, a joyful celebration. You don't have to go to bar bat mitzvahs, you don't have to go to weddings, you don't have to go to birthday parties. I always like to joke that was for the benefit of the community and the individual. When you're really excited and you're celebrating something and there's that one person sitting there who just had a tragedy and you're like, and then it's like awkward. So it allows the community to be unfettered in their celebration, but it also gives an excuse for the person, because it's really hard if you just lost a spouse, God forbid, to then go to a wedding, and you might go to the ceremony, but then to have to dance at the wedding and pretend to be happy when just a few months ago you lost your own spouse is really, really difficult. And so it's nice that there's a community expectation that if you bow out and just send a gift, no one thinks like, oh my God, I can't believe she snubbed me. Everyone's like, oh, she's mourning. She's in her first year. And then at the end of the first year, back to life. No more, no more. And you get to say yard site, you get to say a memorial prayer 4 times a year at the 5 times a year at the festivals, at the high holidays, and at the anniversary of someone's death. But the rest of the time, you have to engage in life. And so it's like there's a really good message there, because for Jews, we don't have a set prescription of what happens after you die. There's some rabbis who believe that when you're dead, that's it. Hope you had a nice time. Enjoy going back into the earth. There's some rabbis and rabbinic traditions that believe in reincarnation, especially in Kabbalistic tradition that believe in reincarnation. And there's some rabbis who believe in, we call it a ha'olam haba, in the world to come. What that looks like is largely undefined. There's some rabbis who say we sit in a yeshiva all day and study Torah for the rest of eternity. And as much as I love Torah study, I'm hoping it's a little bit something else. Like a few activities on the cruise ship would be nice. So yeah. So I tend to lean towards the reincarnation side of things. But, we have so the answer that I always tell my students is, well, do a good job while you're here, live a good life while you're here, and hope for the best, and down the rabbit hole you go. And so yeah, and part of the reason that we want people to move past the rawness of mourning after years, because we, as far as we know as Jews, we only have this life. And if you waste too much time in sadness and sorrow, you're forfeiting this precious experience that you've been granted. And that doesn't do anybody any good. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing about the wonderful diversity of your tradition and enlightening us about how it is that you and your unique congregation and iteration of Judaism practice. We're so grateful for you to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.